This episode of Self-Serving Skillet is a tribute to my grandfather, Lawrence Vasquez Ramirez, a musical genius, such a gifted musician and musical engineer. He worked with some of the greatest musical minds and built them instruments. He designed horns for Miles Davis, for Maynard Ferguson, for Arturo Sandoval, among others. He died on November 14th of this year, 2023, and he would have been 85 years old on December 29th, which is 2 days after the filming of this video and 1 day before it's released. Grandpa, you will be missed. Also pictured is my grandma, Gloria Ramirez, and she made pretty much every meal that he ever ate. My grandpa almost never cooked. He taught me once how to make pancakes, but that was about the only time that I really ever saw him in the kitchen. But today I'm gonna make a meal that my grandpa would have loved, which is my Grandma Glow's homemade beef caldo, which is unlike anything that I've ever seen in a Mexican restaurant. This usually I see a lot of sort of broth-based goodness in a caldo with a lot of vegetables floating around in there. Usually there's some corn hanging out. This is a little bit more of a gravy sort of dish. So without further ado, let's start this. Now, because I'm making tortillas, I have lard available, so that's what I'm going to use as my cooking fat here, and I'm just going to go in with about 2 tablespoons of this lard. Let that melt down in my pan. And what I'm using today is a few very simple ingredients. This is 1 onion that I've cut into half moons. You want this nice and thin because this is, at the end of the day, this is all going to go in a tortilla. I've also done the same thing to a green pepper, and we're going to use a can of whole peeled tomatoes. I've talked about why I like whole peeled tomatoes before on the show. You cannot fake the quality of whole peeled tomatoes, and they're so easy to process down. You can either go in here with an immersion blender, you can smash them up with your hands, but since I'm a little dressed up, what I'm going to do is smash them in the pan. Here we go. Now we're smoking a little bit. I'm going to turn my heat down. There we go, down a little bit. Onions go in. And I want to make sure that these are all sort of broken up, that none of the onions are sticking together. And I want to get everything coated in the fat. Now, when my grandma made this, she did not use 2 separate vessels, 2 separate pots. This was all done in 1 pot, but for the sake of demonstration today, because it's a little easier to show you, I'm going to use 2. I'm going to melt down a little bit more lard. And we can go in with 2 to 3 tablespoons. Again, it doesn't really, we just need enough to coat the beef, right? And at the end of the day, we're making something like a gravy, so fat content in here is going to be our friend, because then we can make a roux. And while I'm waiting for that to melt down, what I can do is season this beef. Now, this is about 2 pounds or just shy of a kilogram of beef chuck that I've cut. You want either the chuck, which is the shoulder, you chuck a ball, or the round, which is the butt. I got a nice round ass. So, chuck, round. And my grandma did say that towards the end of his life, she was using more tender cuts of beef, so it would aid in the chewing process, which if you cook it down enough, low and slow, you don't really need to go that route, right? But you absolutely can. But if you do go that route, if you do use a more tender cut of beef, please don't simmer this as long as I'm going to. You're going to lose sort of the nuance of that beef. It doesn't need it. Okay, this beef needs it because of all of the connective tissue and collagen, right? And we're just going to get the salt and pepper all over this beef, and all we want to do is brown this beef. One of my favorite stories about my grandfather, which I actually don't even remember. Some of you may know this, but in general, my audience doesn't really know that when I was a kid, when I was a child, I had a brain tumor, and I went through several operations to manage it and get it out, and there are shunts still in my head to drain fluid that are just kind of up there now. And as a kid, I went through so many of these operations that, I mean, you can imagine that it was hard on a kid, and I you know, you start to lose a little bit of hope. And the last time I went into surgery, you know, I wasn't doing too hot, right? That's not a lot of fun that a kid's gonna have. I was about 6 years old, and my grandpa, he came to me and he said, "Curtis, if you get through this, I'm gonna build you a treehouse." And I perked right up, right? It gave me hope, gave me a reason to get through it. And I made it. Needless to say, I made it. And that's a very important thing when you're going through an ordeal is to have hope, is to have the will to, you know, to carry on. And you know, he gave that to me. He gave me that gift, and I held him to it. I recovered, and I remember I asked him, let's check on these onions here. I recovered, and I remember I asked him, all right, so what about that treehouse? And, you know, he was like, well, I guess I have to do it now. And I remember my aunts and uncles going, man, my dad never built me a treehouse. What's going on here? You know, but you know, he was a very special person to that little boy. All right, so now I kind of have my beef browned. I'm gonna hold it warm here while I come back to these onions. And my grandma says that she wants them to be slithery, right? Before I add these bell peppers, these green peppers. So that's what I'm gonna do. You want them to be a little translucent, and a little bit like little snakes before you get those bell peppers in. So here's what I'm going to do now. There are only 2 seasonings in this if you don't count salt and pepper. The main one is cumin. Now, on the show, I usually use whole cumin seeds. This one I did go out and purchase some ground cumin so that I could do this to taste. I could add some, and then I could stir, and I could taste, and all of those things. That's something that when you're grinding your own spices, maybe you don't have as much freedom to just be able to use it. So that would be the only thing there. And then allspice. Now, this is an interesting story. My grandma says that let me add just a little bit here. And I like to add about a third as much allspice as I do cumin, and we can always add more spice. We can always add more spice later, but right now I just want to get that base of cumin and allspice down in those peppers and onions so it can start blooming in that oil. So the way my grandma tells it is that she had been making this for many years, and it never quite tasted like her dad's. And then her dad, she says her dad came to her in a dream. She dreamt about her dad, and he said, you're forgetting the allspice. And she woke up and had like a eureka moment, and now she knows how to make it taste like her dad. So I guess my great grandpa Joe's secret ingredient was allspice. When I get that spice in there, I'm gonna transfer my beef. And what I really want is this pan full of the drippings of the beef. Like I said, this was going to be easier. I have twice as many pots to wash, but this is going to be a little bit easier and a little bit faster. So pick your poison. I'll wash 2 pots instead of 1 all day if it makes my life a little bit easier. So now we have this liquid in here, this beef liquid with a little bit of lard in it, and we're going to make a roux, right? And you might be thinking like, that's not very Mexican. Well, so Grandma Glow's ancestors, especially the grandmother that's credited with this dish, who I only know by her nickname of Panchita, was half Spanish and half French. So I really think that here we see sort of that French influence. We're going to make this roux and use that to thicken our gravy. And you might be thinking, well, I don't really know how long this roux needs to be cooked for. I can't really see the color of it to make, a blonde roux or a brown roux or a dark roux or anything like that. Well, you have to smell it, right? You have to use your senses and smell it now while that flour's still raw, and then continue smelling until you get the beef that you smell now, and maybe something a little bit nutty, something a little bit nuttier than what you started around with. And that, I don't know, that'll take you a few minutes. I don't really know how much time, right? 3-4 minutes on like a medium heat, maybe medium low, and you'll get some of this flour sticking to the bottom. That's fine. That's all going to be flavor. Do your best to scrape it up, but it'll come up when you add your acid. And then at this point, our acid and our liquid is going to come in the form of this can of whole peeled tomatoes, which I'll add in a minute. That's smelling nicer, right? All right. Getting a lot of flour sticking to the bottom here. And break up that roux, and we will then get these tomatoes in. It's smelling really good. All right, it's getting a lot more brown. Tomatoes going in. All right, and the first thing I'm gonna do is try to scrape up some of this stuck on goodness on the bottom. That's gonna thicken this tomato sauce. And the second thing that I'm gonna do is just chop all of these tomatoes in half. Okay, that'll make it so that when I chop them a little finer later, they don't explode on me. All right. Once we're done scraping up all of this goodness on the bottom of this pan here, we can chop our tomatoes, get the rest of our stuff into this pot, simmer it. So we have our sort of thickened tomato goodness down here. I'm going to go in with everything else that I have from this pan, which includes a little bit of liquid, so that'll get stirred in, it'll get thickened, and it'll be just fine. So there we go, onions and beef and all of the goodness. Now you're gonna let this simmer because we used the more tough cut of meat. We're gonna have to let this simmer for at least an hour. I really actually like to let it go for a little more than that. I like to let it go for 2.5, maybe even 3. And during that time, you're gonna put it on the lowest you can go. You're going to cover it, but every 20 minutes or so, come by and scrape the bottom, because that thickened tomato mixture will sort of thicken on the bottom, and you'll get a crust, and that will build some more layers of flavor. But before we do that, I actually want to taste the gravy, and this will be my second seasoning. And I'm just gonna go in, get a little bit of that. Could definitely use some more cumin. So I'm gonna keep track of what I'm putting in, just by eyeball. There's no, I don't think I've ever seen my grandma measure anything. And then this allspice, maybe about a third as much as of the cumin that I put in. And I'll just let that go, right? I'll mix it in and I'll just let it go. It'll come back every 20 minutes. Give it a stir and see how it's doing. While we're doing this, while we're waiting, we can get started on our tortillas. So the full tortilla video is actually going to be available on Patreon, and it's going to be sort of a masterclass with a lifelong tortilla maker. My grandma Glow. Last time I was down there, I actually recorded us making tortillas, and the lessons are just invaluable. I will, I edited it down for video, but I'm going to keep the unedited version forever. And actually, I didn't actually edit it that far down for really everything that we're doing and saying is in there. I just sort of cleaned it up a little bit to cut out some dead space. And that's going to be available on Patreon. I did mention that I'm taking a little bit of a break. So here's what I'm going to do. That will be the duck egg content for this month. And probably a week or so after that, I will release it to the rest of my Patreon viewers, my Patreon supporters. I can't talk and do this at the same time. It's coming out looking like a hot air balloon, but that's okay. It's still going to be delicious. we go. Boom. Now we can look a little more professional. All right, get yourself a plate, get yourself a towel, because those tortillas are gonna need to stay hot, and then we're gonna, there we go. We're gonna just flip, and now that's a little bit too done. All right, we have some. You want some browning, but not a lot. So this will be a little bit crusty, but that's okay, because when you start to make tortillas, you're going to fail quite a bit. You need you need the flour to be the right consistency. With you need to impregnate it with lard before you add hot water. You need to add hot water at stages and get your masa just right. Oh man, oh, that feels real good. All right, and we're just gonna wrap that in the towel and do our next one. I'm gonna do a few more. I'm gonna set the table, and then we're gonna have Grandpa's meal. Grandpa also really liked Merlot, so we're gonna pour a Merlot for Grandpa. There we go. Get ourselves a tortilla. And what he always used to do, he almost never made it into a taco. He always used to rip it apart and kind of nudge some food onto the tortilla. Mm. 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 Oh. You would love this. Cheers, Grandpa. You'll be missed. I love you. Tell someone that you love them. Makes them some delicious food. And if not, just share some food with them. And treasure the time you have with them. I'll see you in a couple weeks. Make yourself something amazing. Let your hunger be your inspiration. And thank you for everything.